Caribbean history is not quite what Ainsley Harriott had imagined at 10 in Who Do You Think You Are, after an hour in the war zone with our exclusive new series, Secret War.
On the night of the 7th of November 1941, a Royal Air Force bomber of 138 Special Duty Squadron took off from Newmarket Racecourse in Suffolk. On board were 2 agents of the Special Operations Executive. They were to drop near the town of Ommen in German-occupied Holland.
They were told at their very first interview, look, if you do this, you're putting your life on the line. It's about evens when you come back.
Just after midnight, the pilot identified the drop zone below, and the men jumped. What they didn't know was that they were falling into a trap. Their landing behind enemy lines marked the beginning of one of the most disastrous episodes in the history of British intelligence. The Germans called the episode Englandspiel, or the England Game. This is the story of that deadly game and how dozens of agents were lured to Holland by the Germans. And then the British sent more and more. The England Game cost the lives of 54 agents and 83 RAF aircrew.
I felt it was no longer a question of whether Dutch agents are operating under duress, but how many of them.
But the mystery of the England Game was that the British had many chances to put a stop to the catastrophe, but failed on every occasion. How could it have happened? Were the British incompetent? Had they underestimated the brilliance of the German counterintelligence service? Or was there a more sinister explanation? The fiasco that became known as the England Game began with the German invasion of Holland in May 1940. Thousands of Dutchmen fled the country and its territories, including this man, Hubertus Lauvers. But Lauvers vowed to return and fight.
Lauvers was a junior mechanic in the rubber industry, doing purely clerical work, but was a patriotic Dutchman and managed to get a boat from Manila to Canada, where he joined the Dutch army in exile. Said to himself, "This is jolly dull, isn't it?"
Craving a more active part in the war, he travelled to Britain, which was standing alone against Hitler. He joined the British Army, but soon attracted the attention of a unique organisation. In this building on London's Baker Street, Winston Churchill formed a secret army, the Special Operations Executive, or SOE. SOE's operations in Holland were run by N Section, consisting of 8 British officers. They chose Hugh Lauvers as N Section's first radio operator and sent him for training. He was given a call sign, RLS. As a radio operator behind enemy lines, Lauvers was trained to transmit messages in a specific code. In November 1941, he was ready to return to Holland. So on the evening of the 7th, radio operator Lauvers was joined by SOE saboteur Thijs de Konis, and together they jumped into eastern Holland. Their mission was to attempt to organise and galvanise the Dutch underground movement. What they didn't know was that the movement had already been penetrated by German spies. And the man who organized these spies would prove to be a formidable opponent. Hermann Giskes was a major of the Abwehr, German counterintelligence, stationed in The Hague. Giskes ran a team of agents from a house in a quiet suburb, and from there began recruiting Dutch collaborators. His aim was to set traps for any enemy agents in the country. And it didn't take long for Thijs de Konis and Huub Lauvers to fall into one of those traps.
The first mistake was made by de Konis. He got a message through Lauvers that he was to supply a ground on which stores could be dropped, and found a ground not far from Arnhem, where he was living. His difficulty was going to be getting the stores off the ground. He hadn't got a car. And he asked a friend he met in the bar, a captain of the Dutch army, if he happened to know anybody who ran a transport firm. As a matter of fact, he did, whom he introduced to de Konis in the same bar.
The man he was introduced to was Matthijs Adolf Ridderhof, a diamond smuggler and drunk. He was working for Giskes. Without informing SOE in London, de Konis told Ridderhof about the proposed drop near Arnhem and of his radio operator, Huub Lauvers. Ridderhof was more than happy to agree to lend de Konis his lorry. When they met again, Ridderhof also gave de Konis what he thought was some valuable intelligence. He told de Konis that the German Navy cruiser Prinz Eugen was in Schiedam docks for repairs. Giskes alerted his radio monitoring team to be ready to detect any illegal radio signal. Soon enough, they picked up a transmitter being operated with the call sign RLS. Ridderhof used a process called direction finding to track the signal to Fahrenheitstraat. At number 678 Fahrenheitstraat on the second floor lived two members of the Dutch resistance, Wout and Lies Teller. This was where Huub Lauvers, codename RLS, had set up his transmitter. Before long, the street was crawling with Germans. Lauvers spoke for the first time in 1984 about the events that followed, but only if his identity was hidden.
I was due to transmit on the 6th of March 1942 when Wout Teller came up and told me that there was a German police car standing around the corner. As I say, I didn't expect any trouble, but just for security's sake, Wout and I left the apartment and we told Mrs. Teller what to do should anything happen.
After the war, Lies Teller became Mrs. Lauvers.
They told me, please throw away the wireless. So when they left, I went to the window and I saw several police cars coming up the street. So I went to the room where the wireless was. I took it and I went to the balcony at the backside of the apartment and I threw it away.
Hermann Giskes now turned to Lieutenant Joseph Schreider of the security police, the SS. Giskes sent in Schreider to make the arrests.
In dem Moment kam Kupp schon aufgeregt gelaufen und sagte, er ist schon auf der Straße, er ist schon auf der Straße. Und ich sah dann Lauvers und dann seinen Freund an uns vorbeigehen auf der sehr, sehr eisigen Straße. Sie gingen sehr schnell. Ich fuhr mit meinem Wagen nach und noch mit einem Wagen mit Beamten. Aus dem Wagen sprangen zwei Beamte heraus und nahmen die beiden fest und wir gingen dann wieder zurück ins Haus.
Lauvers protested his innocence, but it was no use.
Lauvers had got in his pocket his false identity card with the address of the flat on it. So they took him back to the flat. What did everybody see as they went in? But his wireless set.
Lauver's wireless that Lies Teller had thrown out of the window had snagged on a washing line below. Giskes and his men easily recovered the transmitter.
A whole series of pieces of bad luck then overwhelmed him. There was his set, covered in his fingerprints.
Schraeder searched Lauver's and found 3 coded messages in his pocket. Giskes may have caught the radio operator, but he didn't know his code, so he ordered one of his men, Heinrich, to interrogate him.
First they started to try and get my code immediately, and I said, well, all right, I'm not going to give it, of course. Then Heinrich said, well, we don't need it, we'll find it ourselves. And I said, oh, okay, you do that.
Now the brilliance of Giskes' plan became clear. He guessed that one of the 3 messages was the story planted on Lauver's about the Prince Eugen being in Schiedam. So Giskes played his hand. He told Heinrich to pretend he'd cracked Lauver's code and understood the contents of one of the messages.
I suddenly heard Heinrich say, ach zo, der Prinz Eugen ligt in Schiedam, which was the text of one of my messages, at least part of it. Well, that gave me quite a shock, because I didn't know how they could have known that without decoding the message.
Lauver's thought, cripes! They've broken my code at sight. This is awful. What am I to do? He told the Germans what his code was. Having forgotten the elementary rule in resistance, if the Germans have got you, say nothing, for 2 days at least. Gives the rest of the circuit a chance to scarper, change their addresses, change their identities, get away.
The first part of Giskes' plan had been accomplished. He had a radio, he had an operator, and now he had his code. Then he put the next phase of his plan into action. Could he get Lauver's to send messages to London requesting more agents, and even equipment be sent? If he could, he'd have the makings of a major intelligence coup. 3 days later, Huub Lauver's accomplice, Thijs de Konis, was arrested and joined Lauver's in prison. Then on Sunday the 15th of March, Lauver's was taken from his cell. He'd already missed 3 scheduled transmissions to SOE. They'd be wondering what had happened to him. Giskes drove him through the city to the headquarters of the radio monitoring section, where they were holding Lauver's captured radio set. Then at number 9 Parkweg that Sunday, Giskes gave Lauver's an ultimatum. Transmit to London that afternoon, or both he and de Konis would be shot. He wanted Lauver's to send the 3 messages found on him when arrested. Finally, Lauver's agreed. Call sign RLS was back on the air. His signal was picked up by SOE cryptology station in Grendon, Buckinghamshire. Later that evening, a dispatch rider delivered his messages to nearby Bletchley Park. Bletchley was where the messages were decoded.
Hello, F section.
Finally, they arrived at SOE headquarters and N section. All SOE agents had an additional security check, an extra form of code hidden within all messages. Only the agent and SOE knew the nature of the security check. In Lauver's case, his security check was based on the number 16. He had to make a deliberate spelling mistake in the 16th letter, or any multiple of 16. For example, in this message, Lauver's might have spelt the 32nd letter incorrectly. When this deliberate mistake was written into messages and decoded, SOE would know that its agent was still free and not in danger.
During our training, it was always hammered in how important this security check was, because as they said, it is the only way we have to know whether you're a free agent or whether you have been arrested.
On this occasion, Lauvers sent the message with his security check. Believing all was well, London sent Lauvers a new message to expect the arrival of another agent, codename Arbor. The Germans ordered Lauvers to reply that Arbor would be welcome. Lauvers decided to do something clever. He thought the Germans might spot his security check, so he inserted a fake one and omitted the real one.
I suggested that I would code the messages for them. And instead of writing stop, I wrote step. And he said, what are you doing now? I said, well, you asked me, what mistake do I make? I said the mistake was always made in the word stop.
So instead of revealing the letter 16 rule, he told them that his security check was to misspell the word stop in every message.
He became known to the decoders in England as slip, step, stop, because slip and step and stop occurred so often in the traffic that he sent.
SOE procedure was correctly followed. The absence of the real security check was spotted, and the message was delivered to SOE with the stamp, security check omitted. It was a clear sign that Lauvers and his radio had been compromised. The message was handed to the head of N section, Major Charles Blizzard. Blizzard had joined SOE from military intelligence. He was highly regarded by his superiors in SOE and was fluent in Dutch. But now, he had to make the most important decision in his life. Had Lauvers made a simple mistake in his messages? Or had he and his radio been captured? Blizzard decided they were mistakes and chose to ignore Lauvers' omitted security check. To this day, no one knows why. An extraordinary situation had developed where SOE were choosing to ignore their own procedures and Lauvers' warnings that he'd been compromised. As a result, they were allowing their agent to be used. Giske's England game was about to kick off. Arbor duly arrived at the next full moon. The Germans assembled at the drop zone. Around midnight, they heard the drone of a twin-engined bomber. The Germans flashed the code signal, and the RAF pilot made his final approach. Arbor dropped straight to the waiting Germans.
Ja, glaubte ja, sei nun in holländischer Gewahrsam, wenn man so sagen will, bei holländischen Freunden. Ahnte ja nicht, dass die deutsche Sicherheitspolizei dahinter steht. Ne? Und man hat zuerst ein Gespräch geführt. Und dann habe ich gesagt, gut, und dann sagt ihm, jetzt zieh dein Overall aus. Und wenn er ihn über die Knie hat, in dem Moment wird er festgenommen. Er kann nicht mehr laufen, die Pistole hat er abgelegt, zu der kann er nicht mehr greifen. Und da erfolgt dann die Festnahme.
Giske's England game had claimed its first victim. Giske's instructed Lauvers to signal London that Arbor had arrived safely. Lauvers assumed SOE knew that wasn't the case, because once again he omitted his security check. But once again, SOE ignored it. Now Giske's and Schraeder decided to play on Arbor's worst fears. Under interrogation, they told their new captive that he'd been betrayed by agents in London. Arbor, real name Albert Baardsen, thought the entire SOE was compromised and began to talk, even about the top-secret SOE training school at Bewley in Hampshire. On the 27th of April, the England game entered a new phase, when SOE sent Lauvers a peculiar message. Go to the cigar shop in Haarlem and make contact with Arrow. Say you come from Bo. Lauvers had no idea what the message meant, but Security Chief Joseph Schraeder read it and knew it would be of use. He went to see the captured agent Thijs de Konis in his cell.
They talked for about an hour. And Schraeder then said, I must be off, old boy. Have a cigar. Produced his cigar case. Bother, it was empty.
So Schraeder asked de Konis did he know a cigar shop in Haarlem. Not thinking, de Konis answered, you must mean Martin's.
30 seconds with the telephone book, and Schraeder had the address.
Giskes and Schraeder now set another trap. They sent a Dutch collaborator masquerading as one of the resistance to the cigar shop. He found the shop and told the shopkeeper he'd come from Bo to make contact with Arrow. The tobacconist said that Arrow wasn't in, but upstairs he'd find another agent. In the attic, the collaborator met an SOE man called Andringer, who promised to take him to Arrow. Together they left Haarlem for The Hague. Andringer led Schraeder's men to Arrow, and both men were arrested on a tram. The two agents admitted they were to meet others in a hotel. So two more agents were arrested there. In turn, this led the Germans to Amsterdam, where yet two more agents, Han Jordan and Henk Sebes, were captured. The cigar shop contact had led to 6 arrests in quick succession. Like Huub Lauvers, Han Jordan was a radio operator. Herman Giskes thought if he could use Jordan's radio, he could play an even bigger England game. But Jordan refused to reveal his code or his security check. So Giskes decided to take a chance. He put his own man on the radio and told London a new operator was being tried out. The messages were sent uncoded and without any security check. In London, Major Blizzard's N section now committed an act of unbelievable recklessness. They signalled back to Jordan. Instruct new operator in use of security check. So Jordan was forced to reveal his code and his security check. The Germans now had their second radio link with London. By the next moon, Blizzard sent in 2 more agents announcing their arrival on the newly captured line. They and their radio fell straight into German hands. 2 more arrived the next month with the same inevitable results. The prison cells were filling fast. Since the capture of Lauvers and the beginning of the England game, Giskes had arrested 13 SOE agents. 5 were radio operators whose captured sets provided 5 separate links with London, entirely under German control. But seen from Baker Street, everything seemed to be going well. Over a dozen agents were in place. All their radio operators were coming up on schedule. And as expected, many requests for equipment, weapons and ammunition were received and approved. No one had any idea that they were being dropped straight into German hands. Then a new man joined SOE and started asking questions about N section.
N section staff might have been livelier to the sort of traffic they were getting back from Holland. The one man who noticed that anything was odd was Leo Marx, SOE's new coding officer, who arrived in the autumn of '42.
Leo Marx did not tell his story until 1984.
I'd go back to the office late at night just to read backtraffic. And I was struck by certain messages from Holland where the security check had been omitted, and consistently omitted. So I made 1 or 2 inquiries as to why, and was given answers which were reassuring. Oh yes, we know all about that. Nothing to worry about.
For the time being, Marx let the matter rest.
The British Army is ready for the attack. Day and night, shock troops rehearse for the time when they will stage the real show. Britain is the bridgehead to Western Europe. On whatever coast these men will land, this is the way they will do it.
By mid-1942, the Allies were already planning for the invasion of Europe they would call D-Day. SOE would have an important role to play. General Colin Gubbins, SOE Director of Operations, was called in to draft what was known as the Plan for Holland. While D-Day was to be the main event in June 1944, the Plan for Holland was devised to help the landing force speed through the Netherlands to the German border. Over 1,000 men of the Dutch resistance were to be trained by SOE as a secret army. The operations leader was codenamed Jurgens. He and another radio operator were dropped into Holland in June 1942. But Major Herman Giskes and Joseph Schraeder's men were waiting for them. They were both immediately captured and their mission discovered. The next month, SOE sent in another saboteur. He too was captured along with his radio. But this agent, called Van Hemert, gave Giskes his first real problem. The Battle of the Atlantic was at its peak. Convoys of supplies and equipment bound for Britain were under constant threat from German submarines. Van Hemert brought orders for an attack on a German radio station controlling these U-boats in the Atlantic. SOE would expect results. Giskes had to think fast. He leaked a story to the Dutch press that there had been an attack, but it was unsuccessful. SOE thought their agent had just had some bad luck and continued to send supplies. From 90 RAF sorties, the German reception committees collected 15 tons of weapons, 500,000 guilders in cash, over 50 radio sets, 900 machine guns, 2,000 pistols and revolvers, 8,000 hand grenades and 50,000 rounds of ammunition. But there were clues that something was not quite right that SOE should have spotted. Dozens of the RAF's aircraft were not returning to base. No one in London was suspicious, despite so many aircraft being shot down. And the Germans always recommended the same dozen dropping zones to London, like these fields, north of Arnhem. After the war, the road leading to these fields was named Engelanderkamp. Four more agents were dropped in September 1942, 10 in October, and 4 more in November. All were intended to reinforce the Plan for Holland operation. All were captured. Baker Street still seemed oblivious to what was happening. But SOE's codeman, Leo Marx, noticed something strange. Looking back through the communication history with Holland, he saw that all the messages that had been sent were perfect. No agent ever sent error-free codes.
In January 43, I felt it was no longer a question of whether Dutch agents are operating under duress, but how many of them. And I wrote a report in the strongest possible language, attempting to quantify just how many I believed were highly suspect and why I believed it. on purely technical coding grounds, irrespective of these appalling, highly suspect security checks, one actually put on record there is really something grievously wrong that nobody has yet explained.
But Marx's warnings were ignored. 8 more agents parachuted to their fate the very next month. At SOE headquarters, there was still no action, but there was a change of command. Blizzard, head of N section, left for a War Office job. His number 2, Seymour Bingham, now took over. Bingham had lived in Holland before the war and had been working in the British consulate before the Germans arrived. Bingham changed nothing. But by this time, Leo Marx was convinced that something was very wrong in Holland and something had to be done. So he devised a cunning trap for those receiving SOE messages. He would send a message to the suspect agents in Holland pretending to be a German radio operator.
He went down to Grenton, where the transmitting station was, and stood by the transmitter's elbow while she sent a message to Holland. And sent her immediately she finished, sent HH. And she sent it straight away, 8 dots, 4 and 4, and got 4 and 4 back. It stood for Heil Hitler. It was the automatic closure used by every German wireless operator.
So it wasn't an SOE agent who answered. Marx had the proof he was looking for.
As a result of the mistake that the Germans made, I was able to say in the final report that I thought the entire Dutch resistance movement was in enemy hands. Now, that might, at the stage, on the evidence I had, have been a gross overstatement. But I said it and felt it, and knew, in order to get this up at the right level, one had to say it strongly and with total conviction.
The 22-year-old Marx showed his evidence to SOE Director of Operations General Colin Gubbins.
He examined it very, very carefully, very rapidly, instructed me under no circumstances whatsoever to discuss this with anyone else in SOE. He also said that if ever I felt it necessary to take the wholly unorthodox steps I had taken, I was to come directly to him and to nobody else. And said, well done. And that was it.
Despite Marx's clear-cut evidence, Gubbins did nothing. Instead, SOE sent yet more agents to the waiting Germans. They dispatched 3 in March, 3 in April, and 3 more in May. All 9 went straight to prison, and their radios were seized by Giskes. Though bewildered, Marx remained loyal to Gubbins.
I would not know directly what action was taken. But if you're asking, did Gubbins take that report seriously? Yes, he did. And if you're asking, did he do everything he humanly possibly could as a result of that report? Yes, he did. As to why agents continued to be sent in, that I cannot answer.
Since that first fateful blunder over Hubelauer's security checks months before, Hermann Giskes had been able to capture 58 Dutch agents. The next clue that all was not well reached SOE from the captured agents themselves. The prison where they were held was unusual. It was the Catholic seminary at Haren in the south of Holland. It was from these cells that the first warning of the disaster emerged. It was tapped out in Morse code over the water pipes, from prisoner to prisoner. Miraculously, the message got through to the Dutch resistance and finally reached London via the Secret Service MI6. The message was that 8 SOE agents had been arrested. At first, N-Section head Major Seymour Bingham didn't believe the message, but then agreed to internal inquiries. He could find nothing wrong. He also called for the return of 2 senior agents from Holland. Of course, they never arrived, but it did not seem to raise any suspicions. But then came an incident that no one could ignore. 2 Dutch SOE agents escaped from Haren prison.
They hid in the men's loo till about 2 in the morning, and then climbed out using a rope made from their bedclothes from the upper floor they were on to the ground floor. Wonderful night for escaping, drenching rain. Nevertheless, when they were still in the grounds, they could hear the jackboots of a sentry approaching. They lay absolutely flat, absolutely still on the ground, and the jackboots might pass them.
The 2 men went on the run and avoided capture for over 3 months. In that time, they crossed occupied Belgium and France and eventually reached neutral Switzerland and found their way to the Dutch legation in Bern. In late November 1943, they sent a full report to London, revealing the England game disaster. But Herman Giskers of the Abwehr outsmarted SOE again. He sent a coded message to London warning them to expect 2 escaped Dutch spies who were, in fact, German agents. So when the 2 men reached Britain, they were thrown in prison and interrogated. Finally, it was the RAF who halted this deadly game. 138 Special Duty Squadron had expected losses from their secret sorties, but on missions to Holland, they'd lost 5 times more men and machines than was expected. By winter 1943, 12 planes and 83 crewmen had failed to Pilots were reporting sudden encounters with night fighters, where no night fighters should have been. Navigators were reporting drop zones too perfectly lit. Finally, in December 1943, Bomber Command suspended all SOE flights over Holland. Seymour Bingham was simply removed from Baker Street and posted out of the way to Australia. His predecessor, Charles Blizzard, seems to have avoided any blame, even though it was he who dispatched 40 of the doomed agents. SOE were not entirely to blame. They'd be confronted by a daunting adversary. And anyway, spying is, after all, a high-risk occupation.
It was a combination of deft police work by the Germans and lack of imagination in London that turned out fatal to all these chaps. But when people were recruited into SOE, they were told at their very first interview, before even they'd been checked out by MI5, look, if you do this, you're putting your life on the line. It's about evens whether you come back. And in Holland, those were precisely the odds. About half the agents sent didn't come back.
But was it as simple as that? Investigating the England game has never been easy, since all signal section records, including Marx's reports, disappeared after the war. And all radio messages were destroyed in a fire. But in 2004, new documents were discovered that had been withheld from the Dutch inquiry in 1949. They contained a clue. This note, sent by Sir Evelyn Shuckburgh of the Foreign Office to the British ambassador in The Hague, refers to the penetration of SOE and mentions the use of double-double agents. Who could these double-double agents be? One name that has been suggested is Huub Lauvers himself. In 1995, Leo Marx travelled to Holland to meet him. Marx at least was convinced that Lauvers was not responsible. And Huub Lauvers died on the 13th of June 2004. So if it wasn't Lauvers, who could it have been? Dutch journalists had a suspect, this man, N-Section's Seymour Bingham. Was he the man responsible for sending 54 agents and 83 aircrew to their deaths? Bingham had been born in Holland and was rumoured to have a relative who worked for Hermann Giskes and Joseph Schrader during the war. The fact that these rumours persist today may explain why many government files relating to the England game remain sealed. Some until the year 2031.
Tomorrow, the SAS Italian job, brand new and exclusive to yesterday. Secret War continues at 9, the War Zone on yesterday. Next tonight, Ainsley Harriott stirs up his past in Who Do You Think You Are?